If people are stuck inside all day and, watching streaming, you're going to watch through all the content that you possibly can fairly quickly. If you're going back to your normal life and going out and not spending all your time inside, you're just not going to spend as much time with these streaming services, which, to be fair, may be good.
Hey gang, it's Thursday, May 20th. Somehow, Eric and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX. I'm second guessing myself. Is that the date? The 20th?
That's Thursday.
Gosh. All right, fair
It's my
enough.
birthday, actually. Yeah.
Happy birthday!
Thank you.
I'm Marcus, and today I'm joined by the other voice you just heard, whose birthday it is. It's Eric Haggstrom, who's one of our senior forecasting analysts.
Thanks for having me, Marcus.
Of course, I feel awful now for having made you do the show on your birthday. I'm so sorry.
I have a presentation too, the same time, so.
Oh, goodness me. I'm so
a lot of
sorry. I'll try not to bother you for a little while going forward. That can be a present.
Perfect.
Today's fact: Canada is home to 60% of the world's 1.4 million lakes. Lake Superior is the largest lake up north. It is actually the world's largest freshwater lake by area. It's about the size of Austria, which is insane. Eric, have you been to Canada?
I have, many times.
Oh,
It's beautiful.
it is Canada. You beautiful country, you. Today's topic, the streaming earnings. So, Eric, we are talking about streaming players today. We are going to cover Netflix in a separate episode because you just have to. There's too much there. But in this episode, we're going to be talking about some of the other major players. But let's start by talking about the streaming industry more broadly. You made the good point before we hit record, talking about zooming out for a second, giving people some perspective on where we are, because it's very easy to go from quarter to quarter and explain what happened with each individual company. But what does the landscape look like? Where are we on the whole? So do you want to start us off on that point?
So when we look at what happened over the past 18 months, there were two major trends. First, we had the COVID-19 pandemic, and we also had the launch of all these direct-to-consumer streaming services, from Disney, who launched Disney Plus, ViacomCBS, who launched Paramount Plus, Peacock was launched by NBCU, and the list kind of goes on and on and on. And when we look at what has happened, because of the coronavirus pandemic, people were spending more time inside, and they were subscribing to more streaming services, and there were more streaming services available because these, major media companies all decided that, hey, we should launch new services and try and capture some of that Netflix magic. What's happened to Netflix over the past, decade or so.
So before we even talk about the individual players, do you see people holding on to those shifted entertainment habits? Because there's some research to suggest that that people aren't going to, just run back outside and forget about all those new learned streaming behaviors in particular. So what do you see for the next 6 months kind of bleeding into next year? Do you see a significant drop off in people streaming things, or do you see people actually holding on to those new behaviors?
There's going to be some choppiness in kind of the short-term trends with regards to churn and people, potentially adding new services. But keep in mind, when we look at, especially I'm talking about the US, when we look at what actually happened over the past 12 months, is that most of the country was not under a state of, severe lockdown. They were going more or less about their normal lives. So I am not actually expecting a significant shift back as, economies reopen and people get vaccinated and go about their daily lives. So I think a lot of the gains that we saw last year are here to stay, period. And the second thing too is that all the investment that, these major media companies are doing right now is going to these streaming services. They're not investing nearly as much as they were in their broadcast and cable TV networks. They're not investing in theatrical releases to the same extent. They're focused on creating content that people will, both love and be willing to pay for their streaming services, because that's going to be the future of most of these companies.
Right. I guess there's also some seasonality at play as well. We typically see a bit of a drop off in people streaming things during the summer as they spend more time outside in general. And so we're going to see that again this year just because it's the summer. It also happens to coincide with us starting to emerge from the pandemic. So there's going to be a bit of that mixed in as well. Let's go through some of these companies, Eric. Let's start with Disney. So the Walt Disney Company just noted that in Q1, their streaming platform Disney Plus surpassed 100 million subscribers, worldwide, 100 million. However, growth has slowed down quite a bit. In Q4, Disney's growth was 29%, adding over 20 million people. In Q1, it was 9%, adding 8 million people. So Q4 double-digit stuff, in Q1 single-digit stuff.
Quarter-over-quarter growth.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
not
That
year-over-year.
added from the quarter before. Exactly. Disney-owned ESPN Plus neared 14 million subscribers in Q1, up 75% year on year. And Hulu, Eric, how did Hulu do in Q1?
They did fantastic. They added a good number of subscribers, and they've been very steady in terms of how much they're growing, which is really impressive. And when you look at their ad business, Hulu is really the leader in streaming video advertising. They're quite a bit larger than everyone else other than YouTube, who's a little bit of a different company, a little bit of a different business. And when you look at their monetization, Disney doesn't break out Hulu ad revenue specifically, but they did mention in Q4 that ad revenue grew about 50% year on year associated with Hulu. And the broader segment that Hulu lives in, their direct-to-consumer streaming ad business, which is what they call it, that grew about 30% year on year in Q1, which is a deceleration, of course, but still really strong growth when we're talking about a company that is measured in the billions of dollars. In the US, Hulu specifically, I believe, is the fourth or fifth largest digital ad seller, not total ad seller, but digital ad seller.
Right.
So that's really impressive growth. And, Hulu has really become a leader in the space. And, to lead into what I think is going to be your next question is, how did Disney Plus do? Is that, well,
maybe it was, maybe it wasn't.
I'm guessing,
it definitely was. So we're talking about Hulu because Disney owns them, and they also own Disney Plus, and they also own ESPN Plus. But absolutely, yes, Disney, their Q1 results. Do you look at those results and say, sound the alarm, growth is slowing down already? Or do you look at it and say, it's a service that's crossed the 100 million subscriber mark, and they've just been alive for 16 months? Like, how do you look at them?
Disney Plus is one of these kind of, I can speak on this for longer time than anyone would really want to hear. But the big deal is that, yes, they crossed 100 million subscribers. That's incredible. Let's talk about what's not incredible. Because about a third of those subscribers are coming from India, and they're not paying nearly as much as anyone else. They're paying roughly $1 per subscriber, whereas everyone else in the world's paying $6 or now $7 per subscriber. So the ARPU is wildly different.
Yep.
So you cross 100 million, you have roughly 60 to 70 million subs that are coming in from other markets that are paying full price. That's incredible. But keep in mind that they've done quite a bit to get to that number. They've discounted quite a bit. They've spent a lot on marketing. They've spent a lot on content. So they have a lot invested in the service. They put a lot of work into it. I think it's an incredible success. It's probably the most, successful launch of a new, media product in the past 10 years or so.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are major questions moving forward. The question is, how much more can they grow in these core markets? And when I say core markets, I'm talking about the US and Western Europe primarily, rather than just launching in Latin America or launching in Indonesia or India, where a lot of the growth that we saw last year was more from them launching in new markets and having an absurd amount of pent-up demand.
Yeah. I mean, as you mentioned, India, the CFO, Christine McCarthy, was noting India's Disney Plus Hotstar was the strongest contributor to last quarter's subscriber additions. Insider Intelligence analyst Nina Getson was also saying that Disney plans to replicate its sports-centric plan in Latin America. It pushed the release date of LATAM's Latin American sports streaming service Star Plus to August in order to coincide with the return of European soccer leagues. So it is focusing on those international markets. You're right. How much more can it grow in this market? We estimate by the end of 2021, nearly half of US adults who watch any subscription streaming platform will watch Disney Plus. That is nearly as many as Hulu, it should be said. Bit of a double-edged sword for Disney, Eric, because as folks emerge from their pandemic cocoons, it will likely hit Disney's streaming business, but it also helps their parks greatly, and it also helps their studio operations returning to full TV and movie production.
I want to push back against some of that statement, though, around, this hurting their streaming business. They saw a lot of growth that was probably unexpected as a result of the pandemic. So if I fully do not expect them to lose subs at any point over the course of 2021, but it might impact the growth rate because you're going up against these tough comparisons.
Deceleration in growth.
Yeah, and I mean, that growth is probably going to pick back up next year, but keep in mind, like, this is an incredibly competitive market. You can cancel Disney Plus anytime you want. And something that, has been brought up quite a bit is that, what is the effect of people spending more time streaming on churn, right? Especially when you start talking about a service like Disney Plus, which has this great library, but the new content's relatively light. They had very few releases last year, and they're just starting to ramp up releases this year. Is if people are stuck inside all day and, watching streaming, you're going to churn, watch through all the content that you possibly can fairly quickly. If you're going back to your normal life and going out and not spending all your time inside, you're just not going to spend as much time with these streaming services, which, to be fair, may be good. If I can watch everything in one sitting on one day, why should I pay for the remaining, rest of the month or next month?
Right. Let's move on to ViacomCBS here.
Yeah.
So with ViacomCBS, they said the service added 6 million subscribers to its newly rebranded Paramount Plus streaming services in Q1, growing to 36 million subscribers globally. ViacomCBS also noted that its Pluto TV ad-supported streaming service now reaches around 50 million monthly active users, adding 6 million new folks in the quarter. The company said that the Pluto TV's revenues more than doubled year on year. Eric, your thoughts on Paramount Plus and where they are at this point? And also a quick note on Pluto, if you will.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with Pluto and then move on to Paramount Plus. Pluto it's a free ad-supported streaming service owned by ViacomCBS, and they've been one of the real success stories coming out of this pandemic. They were purchased by Viacom a few years ago, and part of the rationale was that Bob Bakish, the CEO of Viacom, now ViacomCBS, basically said that this could be $1 billion streaming ad business within a few years. And at the time, they were roughly around $100 million in revenue, if not under. And they've grown pretty significantly, and they've doubled basically a few times over to, a little over $400 million in ad revenue last year. And when we look at what's happened this year, we're expecting, really strong growth moving forward for that, and that they will hit that $1 billion mark in the next, if not next year, in the next few years, which is a major accomplishment given how strong that business has become. So that's a real bright spot on their entire business. Now, when we look towards Paramount Plus, there are a lot of questions about this. This is the rebranded CBS All Access, which has been around for quite a while. It has been subscale compared to Hulu or Netflix or, even, some of these other streaming services. And they've decided to invest a significant amount of money in both rebranding it and adding new content to the service, and in the hopes that it's going to grow subscribers both in the US and internationally. And I think that they have had a very strong start, but there's just such a long way to go for this service specifically. And when you look at the broader market, there are so many streaming services right now. There are more options than ever before. And I think they're going to have a really difficult road moving forward. I think that, the execution has been, spot on so far, but we'll see what happens when these kind of second and third tier streaming services start to possibly get impacted by the return to normal. I don't think people are going to cancel their Netflix subscriptions because they go back to, their normal lives. I don't think people are going to cancel their Hulu or Disney subscriptions, but these kind of, I don't want to say smaller services because they're not small by any means, but these,
I think, as you said, second tier, third tier type services that are trying to hold on to the train as it goes flying past, and some people are going to push those off to the side, hold on to the core ones, and there's going to be churn within those core ones as well, those tier one services. Let's move on to Roku. Roku continued to impress, registering 80% year-on-year growth in total net revenues in Q1, 80% year-on-year growth in total net revenues in Q1, including an over 100% annual increase in platform revenues, which are mainly from advertising. On the users front, Roku added 2.4 million active accounts, bringing the total to nearly 54 million. That's down from the 5.2 million that they added in Q4 2020 and the 2.9 they added in Q1 of last year. But there's some seasonality there, so it's to be expected to a certain extent. The company also noted that March 2020 spike had dragged users forward. Insider Intelligence analyst Daniel Carnahan notes that, quote, Roku also reported strong growth in its supply of streaming inventory, with increases in streaming hours and monetizable ad impressions, close quote. Eric, when it comes to Roku, what were you most impressed with?
Yeah, I mean, they've been a bright spot in the streaming TV ad industry for a long time. They've consistently outperformed expectations for user growth. They've consistently outperformed expectations for monetization. And when you look at what's happened with their business over the past 18 months or so, they've been a major beneficiary, if not the biggest beneficiary, of the shift to streaming. They are a bit of a gatekeeper in the industry in many ways, and they've been able to push around a lot of weight in terms of, for every new streaming service that has launched, whether it's HBO Max, Peacock, Roku does ask for a certain amount of, ad inventory on these ad-supported platforms. They ask for, a cut of the subscription revenue if they signed up on Roku. And they are a major beneficiary of all of that. And when you look at what they've been doing with their ad business specifically, they've been very smart in terms of looking at some issues with the overall TV industry and kind of creating ad products that are very, very useful to, kind of brand advertisers. So I'm thinking specifically of one ad product, is just one example that they have where they'll only charge advertisers if an ad was seen by someone who cannot be reached on linear TV and that didn't see that ad on normal TV. And they've been able to really grow their business quickly as a result.
So where we expect to see from Roku, we estimate that Roku's US connected TV, CTV ad revenues will grow close to 80% year on year to nearly $1.5 billion this year. That would be 11% of CTV ad spending. Roku users in the US will grow 10% to 110 million and account for just over half of the country's CTV users. And then, speaking about gatekeepers, and then US Roku channel viewership will also grow close to 20%, reaching 57 million folks. Eric, finally on Roku removed the YouTube TV app from its channel store in the last 2 weeks following a dispute with Google-owned YouTube. Sarah Fisher of Axios notes that this is one of streaming's first big carriage disputes around anti-competitive behavior in the streaming era. Eric, what's going on here? How big of a deal might this be, or future disputes like this?
Yeah, I mean, carriage disputes in both, cable, whether it's coming from the cable and satellite TV side or in streaming now, have been around for a long time. And this is something that I know Roku specifically has fought with Fox about. They fought with NBCU and WarnerMedia with the launches of Peacock and HBO Max, respectively. So this isn't new, and this is only going to continue. What's really notable about this, though, is just the scale of the companies. Fox, WarnerMedia, NBCU are all giant players. Google and YouTube, though, are a little bit more important in streaming than any of those companies. So this is a real clash between, I want to call it a David and Goliath type situation. Roku is a lot smaller than YouTube and Google in general, but it just kind of shows the leverage that Roku has right now in the specific space, in the connected TV streaming space.
Malcolm Gladwell has ruined that analogy for me. The David versus Goliath. I don't want to ruin anything, but he has a very different take on how that went down. And he's now every time I hear it, I'm like, it doesn't make any sense anymore.
I mean, if you read the actual,
right,
where that's from, it does present a little bit of a different situation.
Malcolm.
And it's commonly used. The last thing I want to talk about though, with Roku is that they are starting to invest quite a bit in original content, which is something that they haven't done before. And, one of the companies that gets ridiculed quite a bit is Quibi. They had a notable failure last year after a significant amount of marketing. But Roku has purchased Quibi's content assets and are now rebranding those as Roku Originals. They bought a number of other original content as well. So they are, building up in that space quite a bit.
That wraps up the first half of the show. Time now for the Halftime Report, where we summarize the key takeaways from the lead story in 30 seconds before in other news. Our second half of the show, as always. Eric, your takeaways from the first half are...
Streaming had a very strong 2020, driven by the coronavirus pandemic and by media companies launching new services. And, while growth may slow this year just because of tough comps and the reopening, it will still be a bright spot in the overall industry, and monetization is going to grow pretty significantly this year too.
That is it for the lead story. It's time now for In Other News, but first, a quick word from our sponsor, VTEX. Retail's next competitive threat may come from a business model or channel that didn't even exist a few months ago. This modern dynamic requires companies to adapt quickly, pivoting business seemingly overnight, something traditional commerce platforms just can't support. There's a new enterprise commerce platform on the rise, one that's fast, flexible, and doesn't require 9 months and $1 million to get up and running. Go to VTEX, VTEX.com/eMarketer to learn more. Right, folks, we are back today in other news. Warner Media plans to merge with Discovery. Nielsen is working on a new rating system for streaming. And NBCUniversal just announced 6 new ad formats. Story 1. AT&T just announced that it's spinning off its media business, Warner Media, and merging it with TV company Discovery to form a major new player in the media world as it attempts to compete with Netflix and Disney, notes James Vincent of The Verge. AT&T owns CNN, HBO, TNT, TBS, Cartoon Network, and Warner Brothers. Discovery's portfolio includes Animal Planet, the Food Network, and the Discovery Channel, which reaches nearly 90 million US homes. Its streaming platform, Discovery Plus, has 15 million subscribers. The Financial Times notes, quote, "The new combination of Warner Media and Discovery will become the world's second largest media firm by revenue after Disney, but ahead of Netflix, with an estimated value of around $132 billion, a combined $40 billion in revenue, and $10 billion in profit." Eric, your thoughts on this deal?
Yeah, the major takeaway is that a lot of these major media companies are looking for more scale to compete in streaming. They need more content. They need more cash flow to help create the investments in content. And I don't think that this will be the last of what we see in terms of major media company consolidation. Disney purchased Fox, or Fox's media assets a while back. Viacom and CBS merged to form ViacomCBS. There's a number of other companies that were very prominent over the past 10, 20 years in the TV space that likely will have to merge as we enter into streaming. And the big deal is that if you're running TV networks, you ultimately have a wholesale relationship with your customers. You're not selling directly to your customers. You're selling to the cable networks and the satellite networks who then manage those customer relationships. When you move to streaming, everything's direct to consumer, and you really need to prove your value every month in order to make sure that people continue to stay with you and don't churn out.
Yes, indeed. The new company, so a few things to note. The new company has yet to be named. Also, the companies expect to close the transaction in mid-2022. They hope to save about $3 billion a year from synergies to be invested back in content, they say. Warner Media and Discovery would spend together combined $20 billion on programming. That's more than Netflix. Story 2, TV measurement company Nielsen is working on a new rating system for streaming that will measure total viewing and audience demographic information across 10 SVOD, ad-supported VOD, so AVOD, MVPD, and VMVPD services, all of the alphabet. Notes Adweek, as it builds out its new Nielsen streaming video ratings system. Insider Intelligence analyst Mariel Soto-Reyes notes that Nielsen will deliver information on who is watching, when they watch, and through which platform, as well as demographics information as well. Eric, how significant of a move is this to getting streaming more on par with linear?
It's significant. Measurement's always going to be a challenge in streaming specifically. There's one major currency in TV, and when you go to streaming, you don't necessarily need to buy on these currencies. You can be working, off of more performance-based goals, that sort of thing. So you just have a lot more options, and that's always going to be an issue when you move from TV, where there's one major currency, the Nielsen ratings, to CTV and streaming, where there are a multitude. So this is an important way for Nielsen to kind of keep one foot in, linear, and also keep one foot in streaming and help, sell both businesses alongside.
Story 3. NBCUniversal just announced 6 new ad formats that will be available across NBCUniversal's channels, from its linear networks to its streaming platform Peacock and its other digital properties, notes Insider Intelligence analyst Nina Getson. She points out that the new ad features center around 3 major TV trends. Number 1, e-commerce. The new at-home shopping ad product lets folks scan an on-screen QR code so they can view, customize, and purchase that item on their phones. Number 2 is interactivity. Choose Your Destiny is one of the ad products, new ones from NBCUniversal, which sounds very intense and a little bit overwhelming, to be honest. But it lets people customize their ad experience in real time. And the final one is advanced visualization as well. That is the final major TV trend that these new ad formats center around. Advanced visualization, using AR to place TV personalities in people's living rooms. Sounds like a bit much. And trying to make the transitions between shows and commercials more seamless by, for example, having an ad appear on a screen within a TV show. Eric, what do you make of these new ad offerings from NBCU?
Ultimately, when you look at linear TV, there are certain technological constraints on what you can do with various ad formats, that sort of thing. So when you shift to streaming, And being a digital format, you do have more opportunity for creativity. Hulu has a number of similar ad formats, including the pause screen ad. And I would expect that, ad-supported streaming services, whether it's Peacock or Hulu or Roku, what have you, will all have pretty similar products moving forward. And there's going to be a lot of creativity to see what works and what doesn't.
Is there any that jump out to you of all of the quote-unquote new ad formats that you're seeing on CTV, the pause ads, these new AR type features, the scanning a QR code on the television, having TV personalities pop out and live inside your living room, which sounds terrifying with you. Of all of these, are there any that you think are going to be kind of staples going forward?
Yeah, I think the two that we should look towards are these non-interruptive ad formats. So specifically the pause screen ad, where it doesn't necessarily interrupt the content, but sits alongside it. That's something that consumers generally like, actually. The second one would be the shoppable ads. And now when I think about shoppable ads, you have what NBCU is offering. Amazon's also offering a pretty similar product. And whenever I think about Amazon and tying, their data to an ad, that sort of thing, being able to buy detergent from a TV ad is pretty incredible. And I think that will have a significant amount of traction with advertisers, specifically CPG brands who also sell on Amazon.
Indeed. That's all we've got time for, my friend. Thank you so much for joining me, Eric.
Thank you for having me, Marcus.
Of course, mate. Thank you so much to everyone listening. Thank you to Victoria, who edits the show. We'll see you guys tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Weekly Listen, the eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX.